Bob and I have to tell you, I'm going to speak to a couple of stories that I learned some really good things about early in my career. But I learned a tremendous amount from Bob because he was one of the administrators that I worked with that understood, from a psychological point of view, how to set things up. And I got from him how in the administrative sector, how to make things work and function in an administrative kind of a way. So it was a great collaborative relationship for a lot of years. Bob mentioned also that I'm a psychologist in private practice. I've been working since 1991 as a psychologist in private practice. When I retired in 2010, working full-time in that capacity. General practice, preschool through adults. And have continued to have the ability to work with very challenging people. Even though they voluntarily come to me, they're still challenging. You have people that are part of your school system that are there by virtue of the fact that they're taxpayers and that they bring kids to you. And that's a different relationship that I promise you, even voluntary people can be extraordinarily challenging in that world. I was joking with Jim before, with Jim Q before about how the presentations would overlap and what would be redundant. And I could just simply stand up here and say, ditto, good work, Jim, I have nothing to add. Because really, that's very thorough in terms of perspectives, techniques, strategies, ways of thinking that are very, very helpful. So what I think I would like to do, and I think my presentation is kind of structured that way, what I'd really like to do is to work towards telling you a couple of stories that happened early in my career that really, I think, emphasize a couple of things. One of the best things in psychology that we do, the current technologies, are cognitive behavioral therapies. Cognitive as in the way you think, behavioral as in the way you act. If you divide the world into those two camps, you can apply that dimensional thinking to any topic. In this case, dealing with challenging people. So you can take that model and use it about personal change, about anything, yard work, any aspect of life. And what I'm going to try to do is structure my presentation around the way you think and the way you act, and try to make that work in effective ways for you. All right? So more and more as I go along in my career, I tend to think I'm more teaching basic philosophy than other things that are more technical. I think I started my career with much more of a 2 + 2 = 4 kind of approach to it. And I think as I go along in my career, it's more of a step back, get your head right, get centered. You can just about deal with everything. In athletics, it's a broad stance, right? The good athletic stance is one of these where you can get moved this way. It's the same thing in your head. You have to be centered. The more you can prepare for things, the better. But certainly, good preparation, good philosophy on your part will help you with every situation possible. Because I can tell from this room, the way that you all respond, that there's a lot of expertise in this. There is a lot of experience, and that's what we all use. Jim mentioned that there was nothing in mid class about these things that we face. I guarantee there was nothing in psych class either about these things. We learned theory, we learned testing, we learned therapeutic techniques, but it had little to do with life, experiences that we all had. So, Jim, if you would. So let me just get to, because one thing I didn't do is I want to get to see who you guys are. How many of you are school administrators? All of you, great. How many of you are secondary level high school? How many of you are middle school? How many of you are elementary? How many of you are from Rensselaer County? How many from Saratoga County? Albany County? Other counties? What other counties? Okay, great. I just wanted to kind of get a sense. Jim was asking that too. All right. Now, obviously, this is probably all true. Just by a show of hands. Yelled at? Threatened by a parent? Physical harm threat? Genuine physical harm threat? Okay. Had a parent bring a tape device. We talked about that. How about advocates brought along? Okay, great. How many parents have gone up the stream to your superintendent? How many to the Board of Ed? How many to a legislator? Great, okay, thanks. All right, let me begin this by telling you that as part of my training, and this is where I talk more philosophy, as part of my training, One of the things that I did as a doctoral student was I worked at St. Anne Institute. And if you know St. Anne Institute, it has both a residential program for young women, but it also has an outpatient side, which doesn't have as much notoriety. Jim knows it from the juvenile sex offender program. I worked there for a year, some of the best work I've ever done. It was a mirror. You worked with a team of 10 to 12 people with families in front of you. Very exciting work, but very, very challenging. One of the things that happened there was we worked in groups a lot with treatment. You got assigned families, you did intakes, you did treatment with them. But I also ran an adult sex offender group and a juvenile sex offender group. One of the most challenging things I've ever done in my life was to work with adult sex offenders. The first thing you do is read all the statements of the men that you work with. You want to hear some grisly stuff? I think Jim has a similar experience of reading these statements from 7-year-old, 4-year-old, 12-year-old kids have been affected by the people you have to help. You have a challenge in front of you. And the challenge is, how are you going to deal with these people? And you're assigned to help them. That's your job, and you have to chart their progress because you have a responsibility to have some commentary about those folks' ability to be done with their probationary sentences or other things that they have in the legal realm. Well, one of the things that they had that was associated with that was a therapy group for the therapists, which was a great idea, by the way. Therapy for the therapists. One of the things I learned the best at that whole year is you got a chance to write, complain. There's a lot of sort of tactical stuff that we learned together. One of the best things I learned about that was no matter what the situation is, you better find a way to like that person. You better find some characteristic in you that you can relate to, and Jim spoke to that, you all spoke to that. You better find some way to connect with them, otherwise there's going to be this wall that's going to make it very, very obvious to all parties involved that you're not going to be effective with each other. So try to think of a way that you can relate to a sex offender. I could relate to the guys in my group. One was a painter. I ran a painting company. I could relate to him. I could relate to a guy, a father, who had offended with his kid. Not at that level, but I could relate to bills. I could relate to marital issues. I could relate. I wouldn't say enjoy, but I promise you, one of the things that's helped me all the time, in all the challenging people that I work with, is finding a way to like them. It works with kids. It works with the parent who comes rustling through the door. It works with all kinds of people. These are some other mindsets. And again, just ways to try to focus yourself so that you have a better ability, a wider stance ability to handle people. All right? You have to remember, it helps me all the time, all right, to walk in and remember, I'm getting paid to do this. All right? My wife, who is in private sector, says, listen, the things you complain about have no traction in the private sector. The things you complain about in schools have no traction. Your butt is out the door if those things are, what you complain about and what I hear you complain about in your teaching staff. They get no traction, all right? You come from a different world, so you want to keep that in mind as you're doing it. You're getting paid to do what you do. It always helps me to realize that parents love their kids, and mostly they're advocating. There may be all kinds of personality overlays, there may be all kinds of mental health issues with them, but essentially that's the thing I try to connect with. They send us the best kids they have. My office mate always says this. He and I share office space, and he says, Rich, you got to go in there, you got to enter their world. You got to know their world, you got to understand it. Jim talked about it. You don't do it at the silly level, at the superficial level, really connect with them. Try to find a way to understand people. You folks, if you're working in buildings, you have long-term relationships with these folks. You know them, probably if you've been around as long as I have, you know the kids of kids, the grandchildren. You know the family stories. You know the histories of these folks. You know what they live in. How many of you have gone out to the homes of the kids in your buildings? How do you do that? Especially some of the toughest things. One of the earliest things I did is I went out on a family visit on the first week of school, and I went out to a dirt floor trailer of a family. And it gave me a real quick perspective, okay, about what they were dealing with when they were showing up at school on campus. It gave me a very quick perspective on that. We're in the relationship business. It's a very important thing to realize. We call it education, we call it psychology, whatever it is, it's relationships. So the first year I'm working at an elementary building, I'm working in an office in a small elementary school, about 450 kids. And my office is right next door to the principal's office. And like I said, I didn't get taught anything about dealing with challenging people at all. I mainly went in there with the ability to test kids and my ground level human relation skills. The office had a passway door between his office and my office. I don't know if that's the way it was originally structured, but for the story, this is absolutely critical. One morning, I heard all kinds of ruckus in the lobby, which was just the way over. Yelling and screaming, parent this and that, scenes you probably have all heard. It seemed like something out of Hill Street Blues, if you remember that old story, that old TV cop show. It worked its way into his office, and I could hear the ruckus continue. I heard him very quietly talking and then very loudly talking. After about 10 minutes, he comes busting into the door, very gently, and he sits down with me. He closes the door behind him. I said, Dick, what are you doing? He says, I'm giving him some time. I told him that I'm going down to talk to the teacher to get some more information. I'm giving him some time. And that reminded me of my friend who was a used car salesman who would say, I'm going in to see the manager about your, the deal I'm going to get you on your car, except that he had respect included in it. He was being really respectful, and he's talking about the people in the way that he was thinking about the people that he was working with. He's saying, I'm really just giving him some time. And I am going to go down there and get some more information and see what we can do about getting together and meeting. But what I got there was, he was just letting it blow over. He went back in there afterwards, and it had calmed down. Very simple. That's admin 101. Give people some room. All right? You got to allow for some venting, but you got to get problem solving as well. You want to, I think Jim covered a lot of these. Listen actively. Try to understand what the heart of their concern is. One thing I use a lot in psychology is, what would it look like if it was better? I use a miracle question. Okay? So if a videotape comes to your house, we're not going to interrupt any of your privacies. Tell me how it would look if it was better from your vantage point in the video. So that you get action sequences. What would you be doing? What would your husband be doing? What would your teacher be doing? What would your son or daughter be doing? And really get an action involved in that, because that immediately becomes goals. So I tend to use that question quite a bit in therapy, and I use it a lot with working in a tough parent situation. I think it's very important that parents realize that you are focused on solutions, that you deflected the antagonism of things, but that you are really there to understand and appreciate them and really be as helpful. I think you want to, and Jim talked about this a little bit, you be the first story home. Make sure you're proactive about that. Don't wait. One of the things I hear continually in my business is my colleagues in private practice don't call people back. People will call me and say, thank you for calling me back. I've called 6 people and nobody called me back. That's not professional, first of all. That's unconscionable on another level. And I don't think any of us would be willing to keep doing that either. So my next story is that, as you all are aware, people bring their stuff, parents. Most of the parents, in my experience, that had a tough time in school, probably had a tough time in school as kids. But I want to tell you this story because it really, really rocked my world again, from the graduate school, from me behind the ears graduate student, sitting in that same elementary school. I had done some testing with a kid, and I was going to share the results of that testing with his parent in that little office next to that principal I told you about. And the first grade teacher that did the testing with the kid warned me, hey, when you meet with his parents, this guy is really nuts, he's really strange, you better watch out. Little did I know that such techniques as you should have somebody with you when that occurs. That would probably be a good idea to have a colleague sit with you. Very naive. I met with his dad, and boy, he was challenging. Boy, was he crazy in so many ways that even a naive mental health person could talk about. But suddenly, after about 20 minutes of going through test results and trying to get the guy just to focus on it, the fire alarm goes off. Guess what happens? He starts ranting and raving and crying and called into the desk. And really, really had a total meltdown. Totally decompensated, babbling, seeing things, hearing things, and so forth. my first mental health crisis, right in my arms there. After I got down on the floor with the guy, which was just my natural instinct, my principal probably would have yelled at me, you know, get somebody in here right away. I just got down on the floor with the guy, and we went to the fire drill, and I just got to talking with him. Turned out, 1978, he's a Vietnam vet. And he had a foxhole experience, and he had been in some pretty bad places and seen some pretty bad things. Well, guess what? He brought that to his situation. And just in being able to connect with the guy, he and I had a fabulous relationship from there. All right, just because I could see him differently. I first saw him as crazy and off the wall, but then I understood something else. I always use this expression with people. There's an explanation for just about everything. Excuse no. I don't excuse much. As Bob knows, as a psychologist, I wasn't the guy who was saying, oh, let the kid off the hook. Oh, come on, let's all be nice. I don't believe in that. I believe in personal responsibility. That's the only way to things. But if you have an explanation for things, it helps you operate differently. And sometimes we need to just understand that what the explanation is. I think that most of the bullets up here kind of diverge from what I was saying about people bring their experience with them. I think if we surveyed difficult parents, most of them had difficulty in school. They probably come from a long line of difficult people. They have lots of practice in their homes, as we all do, with their lives, and they bring it forward to things. I think increasingly, just because of the way society is going, Jim mentioned, you know, the unique relationships that us mental health people have in the educational realm. That I can't see how we can run schools anymore without mental health and education coexisting. I don't see how we can do it anymore. It's too wide open. Society and culture have gotten too wide open for us not to have a parent. So we all bring our stuff too, right? We're all little packages of joy that we raise, we have all kinds of experience. So here's my story on that gets kicked off about how I bring my stuff, you all bring your stuff to the confrontation. How many of you would describe yourself in two camps? Conflict averse or conflict cooperative? How many of you would describe yourselves as conflict averse? I grew up in a household where bottles flying and everything else were part of the picture. All right? I grew up with two opportunities. One was run and hide or go over and make a distraction. Okay? I didn't realize that has a role in how I approach conflict and how I approach challenging situations. I tend to hide. I tend to be the person who isn't going to, although I've learned how to be better at it, to talk straight, to do the things that Jim was talking about. I had to learn that in the profession. And I would imagine all of you come from different backgrounds too. But my supervision story is this. I was doing my doctoral training back in the early days of that, and part of your clinical supervision is you have to sit with another psychologist for an hour a week and review your cases. And I was working on a project, the Separation and Divorce Child Custody Stress Prevention Project, and had a mother who was irate at me. She was totally irate at me. And I had very little experience with that. I'm a nice guy. I try to do nice things. I have no experience with irate except at my house. Well, this mom made a point of calling my supervisor and bringing it to his attention that I had missed the whole dynamic of domestic violence in their divorce and custody. And that how could I be a professional missing that? Seven-page, probably smaller than that, but same kind of intention. I sent it to my supervisor. I was devastated. I was beside myself because I always go in with a good intention. The supervisor told me this after a lot of discussion. He said, you know, Rich, your problem is you're too invested in good news. You're not there. You're not well enough yet to accept bad news or kind of criticism. And you have to learn how to do that. You bring your own stuff in. We all have our triggers, folks. We all have stuff that lights us up and gets us reactive because we're all human beings. We're all in it together. And those triggers are stuff that you're better off being aware of than trying to operate like you don't know. Good, honest, healthy professionals acknowledge their stuff and work with it. Aren't afraid to talk to other colleagues about it in appropriate ways. Look for support around those things, and you do better. All right? If you get into situations that are part of your own life story and things like that, and you don't have that understanding, you're not going to be as effective. You're going to do much, much better if you have an appreciation for what you do, how you do it, and how your relationships have worked historically in your life. Because that's what comes forward when you get a challenging parent. Okay? Next up. Any questions, folks? I know it's brief, but I wanted to kind of keep it that way. Any questions from the perspective of a psychologist in dealing with challenging parents, challenging people?